It's day 10 of 14 days thinking about Anne Boleyn. Today we're supposed to be thinking about her queenship, and my plan was to talk about things like patronage and what she liked and what she didn't like. But by the time I've talked about her wedding and her coronation, it doesn't leave much space. I may have to cover that a bit more in future. I only recently looked into the sort of the pageantry around her coronation. It's just stunning, and I don't have time today to talk about it all. Series in itself. Anyway, today we're going to think a little bit about wedding, coronation, and then just a teeny little bit on patronage. So, married Henry very secretly and privately, we think around the 25th of January. But the marriage isn't sort of formalised, isn't recognised by Archbishop Cranmer until he sort of declares Catherine's marriage to Henry null and void, and then sort of approves this marriage. That's not done until the 23rd of May. At this point, she's obviously very heavily pregnant. The chronicler at the time wrote that the king married her very quickly when he returned, and nobody knew anything about it until she was very great with child. Now, not everybody was happy about this marriage. One person in particular, or two people actually, who weren't all that impressed, was Henry's own sister Mary and her husband, Henry's close friend Charles Brandon. They just stayed away from court and refused to have anything to do with it. However, not long after the marriage had been kind of approved, a few days later, so on the 30th of May, is Anne's coronation. It lasts over 4 days. Now, she must have been at least 6 months pregnant at this point. She actually, will come to that, but she actually gives birth very early in September. So she's heavily, this is in the end of May. It's obviously quite heavily pregnant. There's a lot going on. 4 days of celebration. Now, whatever the public felt about, this was an exciting time. This is the first public civic celebration since 1522. So this is great for everybody. It draws a big crowd. And these are the things that happened on the separate days. So on the first day, we have them escorted via river to the Tower, so to the Tower of London. If you remember, it's tradition to stay in the Tower before your coronation. On the second day, they had court rituals. On the third day was the road procession from the Tower to Westminster. And on the fourth day, there was the coronation itself, banquet at Westminster. As I said, there were so many amazing details from this coronation, visual details. If I was an artist, I'd have a field day. Some of the little details, like there were flags and bunting everywhere, but there was also gold foil so that when it moved, it glittered in the sun, which I think sounds amazing. On the river itself, there were 50 great barges. So these are long boats with all the different livery companies. These were filled with musicians. There was apparently a mechanical dragon that blew out fire, as well as other monsters, and there were fireworks. The Tudors liked fireworks, but they tend to do them in the daytime, so they wouldn't have been quite as impressive as today, but I would have loved to have seen the dragon. There's also an image of a mechanical dragon at the Field of Cloth of Gold, so that's clearly something that was of interest to Henry, maybe. The couple spent 48 hours in the Tower together in new apartments that had just been created, which don't exist today, sadly. Now, while the people enjoyed an excellent show, again, not everybody was happy. We often hear this thing about how people wouldn't lift their hats to Anne Boleyn. The mayor at the time apparently tried to cover for this by saying, the people just didn't want you to see their scurvy covered heads. They were being respectful because their heads were so disgusting. I'm not so sure about that one. I do think it's a little bit funny, where their initials had been written everywhere. So people were apparently making a joke of that, saying, because that's what it spells out. I love how sort of innocent the mockery is. Now, as I said, I really wanted to talk about her sort of queenship in general this time, but there isn't enough time in one video to cover all of this because we have to move on tomorrow. But I wanted to just briefly mention her patronage of Hans Holbein, which you will have heard of, painted things like the ambassadors, like the most famous Tudor portrait painter. Anyway, we don't have, as I'm sure you're aware, a contemporary portrait of Anne. We don't have one that was definitely painted at that time that she sat down for. But there's good evidence that Anne probably did paint her picture. It's just devastatingly been lost. It seemed she commissioned so much from him that it makes no sense that she wouldn't have had her picture painted. So one thing she commissioned was this miniature called Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. She again will have given it to Henry as a New Year's gift, possibly in 1535, if not before. And this would have been kind of a nice one for Holbein, because he's representing Henry as Solomon, he's putting him forward as the wisest man in all the world. And it's also a little reference to Henry as the head of the church, celebrating 1532 and his defeat of the Pope, I suppose. She also had commissioned for him for a New Year's gift in 1534 a miniature water fountain to go on the table. The water came out of it. It was rose water, and it was to wash your hands either before or after eating, which I think is a really nice one for that myth of Tudors being really gross and not washing. So Henry could wash his hands in rose water at the table without even having to get up. She also had various bits of jewellery designed by Holbein, some silver work as well. So there you go, one little hint of patronage there. I will see you tomorrow when we're going to think about the birth of Anne Boleyn's daughter, Elizabeth.